Okay, in analytical accounting, when we work with analytical accounting, we have there's a number of setup things that you need to go through. And as you're setting those up, you first need to obviously have your general ledger up and working. You've got to have your accounts in there, your general ledger. Then you need to, there's some steps you go through. You're creating some default records. You're doing the setup. And this chart shows you're setting up your system. You're creating those default records. There's some settings you want to make sure are set up right in your posting, that the posting options, that they're right, so it'll work with it. Then once you get those set up, you can go through and you can start setting up analytical accounting itself. You're going to go through and it creates some dimensions that you keep track of things with, and some dimension codes that are attached to those. And so I'm going to walk through a little bit of what you have to do in the setup so you kind of understand how it's set up and how it works. In order to understand how it works, it's best to know how that setup's happening. Let's see if I've got this one. With integration of analytical accounting, it integrates with the general ledger, bank reconciliation, sales order processing, receivables management, purchase order processing, payables management, and inventory. Now, you're not going to see payroll on here. Payroll, if you're using payroll, it does not integrate right now with analytical accounting. In version 11 that's going to come out in about a year, they tell us that we'll now have the integration for payroll. So until then, anything that's from payroll, you would need to put in those analytical accounting codes when it's at the general ledger level. Your payroll creates a general ledger entry, and you'd have to go in that entry and add the analytical accounting. Now, one of the good things about analytical accounting is you can make some changes after the fact after you've already posted things, so that will help. Okay, as we look at the setup, one of the things you want to make sure you're doing as you start your setup, since most of you haven't had, I don't know if any of you here that just came has analytical accounting, but if you haven't set it up yet, when you're setting it up, login as SA or that other login. The process, let me get into the system and we'll show you. Okay, when you're creating the originally, and we've got to wait for this to come up, you're going to find that your setup areas that you're working with, part of it's in administration, and the part in administration is under the analytical accounting. This setup, this area here is a setup area for analytical accounting, and then the rest is in finance that you'll be working in. One of the things that you'll want to do is look at your posting options, and in your posting, you're going to see that you have the ability to post. Let's bring up, for instance, on financial. You're posting by batch or transaction and into existing batches. What you need to do, you need to select the option, create a journal entry per transaction, and if you select the batch, then you have to mark the use account settings option. There's a use account settings option in there. So that has to be marked that way for it to work. And once you turn on analytical accounting, you're going to find that's the only options you're going to have. So up here where it says, see here where it says transaction and batch, you're creating an entry by. If you use batch on here, you're going to have to mark this use account settings. That will make it work. So you either use transactions or the batch with use account settings. So if you're if you're going to activate it, just come in here and see what you've got set up and see what you need to do to make sure it works. What's that? Where do you want to see? Right. Right, which would be okay. If you're doing this, just make sure you come in here and mark this. And after you go to setting, after you actually activate it, that's the only options you'll be able to do with it. Okay. Okay, in here, under the Analytical Accounting, you've got a setup. And the setup is where you see where it says create these default records. It's grayed out on mine. That's because I've already set it up and it's working, so it's grayed these out. This would be where an option you'd need to come in and create some default records to begin with. It goes out there and it creates some records. Then when you sign on to Great Plains, it adds the tables, the things it needs. Then when you get ready to activate it, and in the setup you wouldn't have to activate it right away. You could do some setup options first. This is where you'd activate it and it turns it on. And since I've activated, all that is grayed out for me now. Then in here, this assignment, this one is where I'm telling it which modules I want it to work with. And generally, I just turn them all on because people usually want to be able to utilize all the function that I have. But those are the modules, how you turn those on so you can use them. And so it's just a matter of clicking on them and saying OK. Then there's what they have, user access. And in the user access, you're going to be setting up some transaction dimensions and some codes. And in those, you've got to tell which users can use those codes. So in the security, you can tell it, I only want certain people to be able to use certain codes and certain things that I've set up in there. That one, even though it's in here and it looks like something you set up right away, you're really going to have to get your transaction dimensions and your codes in there before you can really do much in here. But remember, that one's here as you're setting up the others. So those are the things in administration you've got to deal with. Then under financial, if you go over to financial, then what you're going to find is under the setup in here, actually, it won't be under the setup, it'll be in the cards. Under the cards, you've got all these different things that you're setting up. And the first thing you're going to want to look at is a transaction dimension. Now, with this, you're setting up some different dimensions, and then you're going to put some codes to them. And when you're making a journal entry, you're going to be picking what kind of transaction dimension you're using. Those will be your options, and then it'll have whatever those codes are that are under it. In our case, I've set up a number of them. For instance, I've got this department division. I said, okay, I want to be able to further break down some codes in my general ledger, and I want to put it by a division, by a department first and then division after. So I've got this department. I came in here and I set up, and I also set up the division. I've also got, in this case, when we talked about grants we were tracking, I had one where I was tracking some grants. And this one down here with the salesperson, I was tracking this manager and salesperson. I was tracking some salesmen and some sales. The grant was tracking a grant and the year of the funding for the grant. So that's what those things you're seeing there are ones I've set up. When you set one up, it's just a matter of giving it a name, giving it a description, and saving it. Then you're going to come in under the relationships, and you've got to decide, okay, how do these relate to each other? So for instance, in departments, I've told it in departments that this transaction dimension that I set up called division it's going to be a valid subset, which means that there's going to be, I've got divisions that are underneath my department. and I put combinations not allowed on these others because